Am I the only person that likes to hug their books on a regular basis? Anyone? Anyone else? No? Whenever I finish a book, I'm just like, oh, yes. Anyway, that might just be me. Probably just me. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I'm so happy to have you here. Today we are going to be talking about the books that I read in February. I read 4 books. 2 of them were audiobooks, but I read 4 amazing books and I can't wait to tell you about them. Recently, I've been thinking a lot about Goodreads goals and reading goals, and it's funny because when I first started my YouTube channel and when I was getting into reading, I tried to read as much as possible and as much in a month as I could. And because that was a time where books were really like one of the only things that brought me that escapism that I really needed throughout college and everything. And lately I am much more happy and content in my life, and I feel like I am relying less on reading, which is a good thing, but also I do feel like I am reading less. And I've been thinking about that a lot, especially because talking about, you know, wrap-ups, reading wrap-ups and Goodreads goals, and I think I like picking books that I intentionally want to read for the book itself and not only for the escapism. Does that make sense? I've just been thinking a lot about this, and I wanted to talk about how, although I read 4 books and that is a decent amount, I always feel like with YouTube and social media, everybody's trying to read so much and it can get a little bit overwhelming and can add a little bit more pressure to a thing that should not have pressure added to it, which is just the enjoyment of reading. So I wanted to tell you guys, if you ever feel pressured to read a ton in a month, I hope you don't, because I feel that way, and I just want to, I don't know, I guess shed some light on this topic and say that if you read 1 book a month, if you read 1 chapter a month, as long as you're reading for enjoyment and it's something that brings you some kind of comfort, then that's all that matters. It doesn't matter how many books you read in 1 month. And so I always think quality over quantity. Anyway, sorry, I wasn't intending to ramble in the first part of this video, but it just happened. So anyway, the first book that I read in February I loved, and I actually don't have a physical copy of it because I listened to the audiobook, and that is I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. And I listened to this while I drew her author portrait because I do have an author portrait of her going up next Friday, and I'm so excited for you guys to see that and to have it available. And so one of my favorite things that I love doing when I illustrate, especially an author portrait, is reading or listening to a book written by that author who I'm drawing. And so I listened to I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings while I drew Maya Angelou, and the best part about it was that she narrated the audiobook herself. So it really felt like I was drawing her from life. It didn't feel like I was drawing her from a photograph because I was listening to her speak as I drew her portrait, and it was just this really surreal experience. And it made the whole book and the whole drawing process extremely special in a way that it wouldn't have been if I didn't listen to the audiobook while drawing her portrait. So I loved that. It was an incredible story. I didn't know much about her life, to be completely honest. Now I definitely want to read more Maya Angelou and learn a little bit more about her. That's one of my favorite things about my author portrait series, is I love learning about authors. It's one of my favorite little side hobbies that relates to reading in general. I thought it was amazing the way that she talked about adolescence and childhood and being a young girl or a person of color, and her experience was incredible. And I especially loved how she explored her relationship with her brother, Bailey. I thought that the way that she wrote about him and her, their childhood and growing up together was just so beautiful. Their bond to one another was lovely, and also her relationship with her grandmother and her mother and her father, and her uncles. It was all very interesting, and I'm not a huge nonfiction reader, but I do love certain nonfiction. Oh, that's so funny, I just made the connection in my head. I do have another nonfiction book that I read this month. So as I'm saying, I'm not a huge nonfiction reader. I have 2 that I read in February out of 4 books that I read in February. I have noticed more that I want to get more into nonfiction, so if you guys have any nonfiction recommendations, I would love to hear them. I just absolutely loved hearing about Maya Angelou's experience, especially her experience as a woman and her growing up, and the ending really surprised me. And I think I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings is the first part in a series or a duology, or I'm not sure. I think there's another book where she talks a bit more about her life after the ending of I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, so I would love to read that as well. But I thought it was fantastic. I'm so glad that I read it, and it was such a special experience listening to her narrate her own story while I drew her portrait, so I just loved it, and highly, highly recommend you give it a read if you haven't. And then the next book that I read, if we are going in order, it is actually the other nonfiction book that I read, and this has become one of my favorite books I think I have ever read, and that is John Green's The Anthropocene Reviewed. No, The Anthropocene. Yes, The Anthropocene. I was talking about this in a reading vlog as well, and I was trying to figure out how to say it. I think it's Anthropocene. Anyway, I loved this book to pieces. Oh my gosh. So this is John Green's nonfiction. So I have read The Fault in Our Stars and Turtles All the Way Down by John Green, but this is my first time reading any nonfiction by him. I don't listen to his podcast, but now after reading this, I really want to listen to his podcast as well. And of course, his brother Hank Green has also written books and I believe is on the podcast with him. The Anthropocene Reviewed is John Green's nonfiction book about different aspects of life, and he talks about these different things that are significant to him on a 5-star scale, and he talks about how 5-star scales even became a thing, and at the end of every single section, every single chapter, he says, so each chapter is titled like a specific thing that he talks about. So, for example, one of the chapters is Diet Dr. Pepper, and he talks about Diet Dr. Pepper, but the way that he talks about each aspect of the story, it's about Diet Dr. Pepper, but it's also not about Diet Dr. Pepper. It's about so much more, and every topic that he introduces in each chapter just leads on to a million different topics that are so groundbreaking and eye-opening, and I love when books do that, when it's about one thing, but it's really about so much more, and that is exactly what John Green does in this book. So anyway, at the end of each chapter, he says, I give Diet Dr. Pepper however many stars. And so at each end of the chapter, you look forward to his star rating, and I thought it was just brilliant. Some of my favorite chapters were, I loved the introduction, I also loved the first chapter, You'll Never Walk Alone, also Humanity's Temporal Range, Our Capacity for Wonder. I loved the chapter about sunsets. I also loved, one of my favorite chapters is Auld Lang Syne, which I know my friend Sarah, because I was FaceTiming her while I was reading this, and she said that the Auld Lang Syne chapter was her favorite and it made her cry. And that's another thing about this book, is I wasn't expecting for it to make me so emotional, but it made me incredibly emotional, like especially about topics that he talked about that you wouldn't think would be emotional, but they are, just the way that they led to different aspects of life that everyone can relate to. Yeah, there are so many chapters that I loved so much. Another one is Whispering, another one is Wintry Mix, another one is the Notes app, Sycamore Trees. The Farmers on Their Way to a Dance was amazing, as well as the postscript and the notes. Just like, even the little added notes and introduction of this book are just fantastic. Let me read you some of my favorite parts. Okay, I just want to read you guys part of the introduction because I think it is incredibly beautiful. So it says, this book started out as a podcast where I tried to chart some of the contradictions of human life as I experience it. How can we be so compassionate and so cruel, so persistent and so quick to despair? Above all, I wanted to understand the contradiction of human power. We are at once far too powerful and not nearly powerful enough. We are powerful enough to radically reshape Earth's climate and biodiversity, but not powerful enough to choose how we reshape them. We are so powerful that we have escaped our planet's atmosphere, but we are not powerful enough to save those we love from suffering. I also wanted to write about some of the places where my small life runs into the large forces of the Anthropocene. Okay, I'm going to skip and go to another part of the introduction, which I love so much, and it says, at the end of his life, the great picture book author and illustrator Maurice Sendak, who I love very much, said on the NPR show Fresh Air, I cry a lot because I miss people. I cry a lot because they die and I can't stop them. They leave me and I love them more. He said, I'm finding out as I'm aging that I'm in love with the world. It has taken me all my life up to now to fall in love with the world, but I've started to feel it the last couple of years. To fall in love with the world isn't to ignore or overlook suffering, both human and otherwise. For me, anyway, to fall in love with the world is to look up at the night sky and feel your mind swim before the beauty and the distance of the stars. It is to hold your children while they cry, to watch as the sycamore trees leaf out in June. When my breastbone starts to hurt and my throat tightens and tears well in my eyes, I want to look away from feeling. I want to deflect with irony or anything else that will keep me from feeling directly. We all know how loving ends, but I want to fall in love with the world anyway, to let it crack me open. I want to feel what there is to feel while I'm here. Sendak ended that interview with the last words he ever said in public. Live your life, live your life, live your life. Here is my attempt to do so. And that's the end of the introduction. Oh my god, that's just the introduction. And then I want to read so much of this book to you guys, but just please read it yourself and listen to the audiobook if you're able to, because hearing John Green himself narrate it, it really just feels like you're having a conversation with him, and that's one of my favorite kinds of audiobooks. I'm just going to read you guys the beginning paragraph of the chapter called Auld Lang Syne because it is so beautiful, the whole chapter, but I just want to read you a little bit of the introduction so you can get an idea of how it sounds. I find it fascinating that in a world where so much is so new, we welcome a new year by singing Auld Lang Syne, which is a very old song. The chorus starts out, For Auld Lang Syne, my Jo, for Auld Lang Syne. We'll take a cup of kindness yet for Auld Lang Syne. Jo is a Scots word that can be straightforwardly translated to dear, but Auld Lang Syne is more complicated. It literally means something like old long since, but it's idiomatically akin to the old times. We have a phrase in English somewhat similar to for Auld Lang Syne, for old time's sake. So that's the first paragraph, and he starts out by talking about one topic, which is Auld Lang Syne, or any of the topics, and it really just ends in a way that is so emotive and beautiful and heartwarming and hopeful, and I adored this book so much, and I just think everyone should read it. It should be one of those required reads, just because he adds so much beauty and hope and love into his words and the world around you, and it really gives you a new perspective. To put it simply, I wrote on my Goodreads as my review, the world is a little brighter, is filled with a little more hope for having this book exist within it. I give the Anthropocene reviewed 5 out of 5 stars. So I was just copying John Green with saying I give the Anthropocene reviewed 5 out of 5 stars, because that's how he ends every chapter. But yeah, I just feel like this book, there's a little more hope in the world for having this book exist within it, and I think that you should absolutely read it. The next book I read in February was for Game of Tomes, and that is Once There Was a War by John Steinbeck. Emma and I just had our live show for this book last Sunday, the 26th of February, so you can watch that on Emma's channel. Emma and I didn't love Once There Was a War as much as we loved A Farewell to Arms, so we ended up talking a bit more about A Farewell to Arms, but I do want to just highlight what I really enjoyed about Once There Was a War as well. So Once There Was a War, it says on the back, John Steinbeck's dispatches from World War II, filed for the New York Herald Tribune in 1943, vividly captures the human side of war. So this is his correspondence, and these are his nonfiction accounts that were heavily censored because of the position that he was in. I had a harder time emotionally connecting to it, which is weird because you would think you would connect to it more because, oh, actually, wait a minute! This is nonfiction! I just realized that I read 3 nonfiction books in February, and I just said that I don't read a lot of nonfiction. Oh my gosh, okay, this is also nonfiction. Wow, Carolyn, look at you reading more nonfiction. What I was surprised at was that I wasn't emotionally connecting to it as much as I thought I would. I think it's because, personally for me as a reader, I rely heavily on the connection that the reader feels to the characters. And because we didn't have one main character, or we didn't have one cast of characters, there wasn't really anyone that I could sink my teeth into besides Steinbeck himself. And he talked about this in his introduction, which his introduction was probably my favorite part of the whole book. I thought it was so beautiful. The way that he writes as the narrator, he almost doesn't write himself. Like, he writes himself, but you kind of forget that he is there. I don't know how to explain that, and you might disagree, but that's at least how I felt. I loved the way that he really explored the war, especially because obviously this is nonfiction, so it's just beautiful that we can have this peek into the experiences that he faced and that so many others faced during the war. Not only the soldiers, but also, like, one of my favorite chapters is the people of Dover. I know a lot of you guys also loved that chapter as well who joined in, where he talks about the people of Dover. Actually, I should read that part because I read it during the live show, but I loved it so much that I want to read it for you guys here as well. So this is the chapter, The People of Dover, and it says, "Jerry is like the weather to him. He complains about it and then promptly goes about what he was doing. Nothing in the world is as important as his garden, and in other days his lobster pots. Weather and Jerry are alike in that they are inconvenient and sometimes make messes. Surveying a building wrecked by a big shell, he says, 'Jerry was bad last night,' as he would discuss a windstorm." And so he's talking about these people of Dover that do not care about the war. They are just treating it as if it was a bad windstorm, and they're going about their lives as they would. I just thought that was so brilliant, and I love the insight that we have, because without this we wouldn't know that. And I think that's the beauty of literature, the beauty of fiction and nonfiction, is that it gives us a glimpse into places that we wouldn't have been able to go to without them. And I just think that that's absolutely magical. That's the magic of books. So yes, I loved this. Didn't love it as much as A Farewell to Arms, but I do recommend reading it if you're interested in it. I know a lot of you said that you wouldn't have picked this book up if it wasn't for the book club, and you're so glad that you did because it became a new favorite. I know majority of you guys really, really loved this book, and I know Hemingway can be quite hit or miss. A lot of you didn't like Hemingway as much as you liked Once There Was a War better, so I think it's very personal preference, so I would say give both a try if you haven't read either. So that is my third and final nonfiction book that I read in February, and then the fourth book that I read in February I actually just finished last night, and I adored it so much, and that is Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami. I tabbed so many parts of this book, and I wish I could read you every single tab that I made note of, because this book is so beautifully done, beautifully written, so emotive, so deep, and I don't even know how to talk about this book because there's just so much in it. One of my favorite parts about this book was the way that Haruki Murakami writes, and this is my first Murakami, and I'm so excited to read more from him because his writing I flew through it. Every time I picked up this book, I wasn't even paying attention to the page number or how many pages I was reading. I was just flying through it because I was so captured in the story and the characters. And at first, so anyway, let me tell you a little bit about what this book is about. So we are following our main character, Toru Watanabe, around the time where he's 19, 20, going to university in Tokyo, and all the people in his life, his coming of age, his experiences with different relationships and friendships and family relationships, and exploring mental illness as well as exploring just aspects of growing older, growing up, losing your adolescence, and coming of age in its entirety. And I loved the way that he explored all of the relationships. I thought it was masterfully done, and the way that he wrote was just fantastic and so fluid and natural, and his writing really just took my breath away because there are so many quotes in here where he uses such beautiful images and descriptions to illustrate and talk about different things, and the way that he wrote was lyrical but not too flowery, and I just loved it. We are in first-person narration with our main character Toru, and in the beginning I had a hard time understanding Toru. I really didn't I felt like there was a wall or a veil between me and him, and even though we were in his perspective, I really feel like I couldn't completely get into his brain and understand him. And then towards the end of the book, at the end, I felt like I knew him so well, which is so funny because in the beginning I felt very distant from him, and then at the end I just felt like I was feeling everything that he was feeling. And I knew what was going to happen at the end, but I was still so shocked and devastated by it anyway. And the way that Norwegian Wood, the title of the book, and the song by the Beatles, it's my favorite Beatles song ever since I was little, and I knew that that's why the book was named Norwegian Wood, because of the song and because one of the side characters, or one of the like side main characters, Naoku, it's her favorite song, and the way that it relates to Naoku and her storyline, I don't know, it was so brilliant. It was so, so brilliant. Yeah, and also like the cover, I have thoughts on the cover, but I don't want to say anything. I don't want to spoil anything. But I'm so happy that I finally read my first Murakami. I don't know which one I want to read next, so definitely let me know in the comments if you love Murakami, which one you think I should read next, or which one is your favorite. There are so many aspects of this book that I want to talk about, but I just don't really want to go into spoilers. Ooh, okay, I think this is the perfect section to read. So it is the very beginning of the book. It is on page 4, so I think it just gives you a really good idea of how the book reads, as well as it's really Toru just introducing us to the story itself. So it says, "It takes time, though, for Naoku's face to appear, and as the years have passed, the time has grown longer. The sad truth is that what I could recall in 5 seconds all too soon needed 10, then 30, then a full minute. Like shadows lengthening at dusk, someday I suppose the shadows will be swallowed up in darkness." Like, first of all, is that not beautiful? The image of the lengthening shadows, which as you can see is sort of illustrated on the cover, the lengthening shadows. There are so many instances of that where I just, like, so many pieces kind of connected in my brain. Anyway, it keeps going on by saying, "There is no way around it. My memory is growing ever more distant from the spot where Naoku used to stand, where my old self used to stand. And nothing but scenery, that view of the meadow in October, returns again and again to me like a symbolic scene in a film. Each time it appears, it delivers a kick to some part of my mind. 'Wake up,' it says. 'I'm still here. Wake up and think about it. Think about why I'm still here.' The kicking never hurts me. There's no pain at all. Just a hollow sound that echoes with each kick, and even that is bound to fade one day. At Hamburg Airport, though, the kicks were longer and harder than usual, which is why I am writing this book. To think, to understand. It just happens to be the way I'm made. I have to write things down to feel I fully comprehend them." Oh, so good. So good. I want to read so much more, but I think I might just leave you guys with that and just tell you how amazing this book is and to tell you to read it. So yes, that is Norwegian Wood. So these are all the books that I read in February, as well as I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. I loved them all so much. I can't believe I read so much nonfiction. Definitely let me know which nonfiction books you love, and I definitely want to read more nonfiction as I don't know, read. As the days go by, I'll read more nonfiction. Don't know where I was going with that. Anyway, so thank you guys so much for watching this video. I would love to know what you read in February and if you've read any of these books and what you think about them. I hope you have a wonderful March. I can't believe how quick time is flying by, but I'm very excited for what books are to come, and I definitely know I will be reading David Copperfield this month because that is our Game of Tomes pick for March. Very excited to start it, although it is quite long, so I think I'm going to extend it the full 2 months. But anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you are having a fantastic day wherever you are, and I will see you soon in another video. Happy reading.